they've actually closed. Skip over that. I think I've gone through this with you. There's been discussion from John Hofmeister about getting off foreign oil. And I think every American actually believes strongly in that. And as John said, we've had, what was it, John? 8 presidents who believe strongly in that, and 19 Congresses that have believed strongly in that. And I don't question any of their motivations. But it's obviously been a horrendous failure. Now, here's the question. Given our natural gas resources, are we in fact going to use natural gas to, along with increased production of US oil, finally reduce or eliminate foreign oil? I think that's a very open question, and I don't believe that's going to happen just through, quote unquote, the magic of the free market. I think government and policy, both at the state and federal level, will have to play a role to move natural gas into the transportation sector. If it doesn't, I don't believe actually this boom in shale gas and this bounty of shale gas will play a role in getting us off foreign oil. In order to get off foreign oil, we obviously have to do more US oil production, and John pointed that out. And I think it's hopeful that we've actually begun to see an upturn in US oil production in the last few years. And I think we should remember that in 2010, we produced more natural gas in the US than in any year since, I believe, 1973. So there are some trends in production of domestic oil and gas that are beginning to, from where I stand, turn in the right direction. But we're also going to have to get serious about, in fact, deploying the infrastructure that would allow alternatives to oil to become a big part of our transportation sector, and that's natural gas vehicles. And I'm delighted to see in the expo the considerable presence of natural gas cars and trucks and other promotion for natural gas vehicles, but it's also electric vehicles. And let's remember, natural gas now makes about 25% of the US electricity. Electricity is a way of powering vehicles, and it's a way of using natural gas to power vehicles. So I hope COGA is going to be strongly supportive of electric vehicles. It's also going to take biofuels, and it is also going to take efficiency. And I think it's a tremendous development that the automakers and President Obama, for the second time in 2 years, have in fact embraced much higher miles per gallon CAFE standards. The latest news is really startling. The 54.5 miles per gallon standard is really a game changer. Now, I have been in the middle of the wars, and I know what a picketer looks like. I have been picketed multiple times recently, or in the last couple of years. And nobody in the business of public service should whine about that. You don't get into these jobs if you're not ready to deal with the public, including the public who is very worked up and very concerned. And I thought Deputy Secretary Smith did a tremendous job in explaining how you have to take all of the complaints seriously. And I'll be frank in this audience, it's not always easy to take every single one seriously, but you really do need to do that. We need to also step back and I think set the expectations correctly. I think we have to level with the people of my state as well as the country that natural gas drilling is industrial activity and it cannot be done with zero impact on the environment. I said that within the first 2 weeks of taking office in September of 2008, and I was then asked to resign by the Pennsylvania Green Party, simply for saying that. Because it was a recognition, it was an honest statement that you couldn't do it without impact. And their position was, then you're not the right person for the job. Well, it gets to this issue of expectations. And I think we have to level with people about it. But as we level with people about that, I think we have to also explain to them that if it isn't natural gas, it's something else. And quite frankly, it's probably something much more dirty. And I personally don't think the gas industry as a whole does a good enough job of explaining the comparative advantages of natural gas versus particularly coal. Now, I know coal can be burnt cleaner or dirtier. It does very much depend on what technology is used at a plant. But natural gas, all other things being equal, has considerable advantages over coal and, in fact, oil. But I don't see that sort of direct comparative advertising or messaging consistently coming from the natural gas industry. And I think that means that a lot of people in the public don't actually understand that. So in Pennsylvania, our goal was to both produce gas and protect the environment. And I'm very proud to say that this year, we're in Pennsylvania going to probably be producing 3.5 billion cubic feet per day, most of it shale gas. US shale gas production in February was 16 billion cubic feet per day. So by the end of this year, we're going to be a big part of US shale gas production and not an inconsequential part of total US gas production. We've drilled over 3,500 wells. I think our record is strong on the point that we, in fact, take seriously the need to produce natural gas. And I can also tell you that in my experience at the Department of Environmental Protection in Pennsylvania, the EPA never once got in the way. I love that question that got asked. My experience, the EPA never called me once. In fact, I picked up the phone and called my colleague at Region 3 once about a shale drilling issue. I initiated the conversation. But there was never an effort at any point in time, in my experience, from the EPA or the Obama administration to stop what we were doing in Pennsylvania on the production side. And we've taken a lot of heat from some people for being so aggressive in producing that gas. But we were equally serious about protecting the environment. And we did, in fact, enact 4 regulatory packages that across the board strengthened the rules on paper governing gas drilling in Pennsylvania. I don't have time to go through all of them all, but you can see one was concerning water withdrawals, one was water disposal, another was on the drilling standards themselves, and then we, in fact, put in place a major buffer requirement from all development, not just gas drilling, from all development for our very best streams. Over 22,000 miles of streams now have a 150-foot buffer requirement. It's not enough to get the rules stronger in order to reassure the public. The public, quite rightly, is actually suspicious of regulators and government. And one of the things they're suspicious about is whether there will be enough what they would call environmental cops on the beat. And we took that seriously in Pennsylvania. We more than doubled our oil and gas regulatory staff. I believe we were one of the very few states, perhaps the only state, to do anything like that. We went from 88 employees to 202 employees, and that was all paid for while the world economy was collapsing around our heads, and our revenues were collapsing with it. And it was all paid for by raising the fee on the gas industry, and the gas industry, to its credit, did not oppose that rule. So I could go on forever with you about what the issues are that need to be addressed to reassure the public. I have a list in another presentation of 11 issues. I don't have time now, so I'm going to narrow it down to what I think are the 3 most serious ones that I would put on your plate for hopefully consideration. In Pennsylvania, the water disposal issue is actually substantially remedied. We have had oil and gas drilling longer than any state in the Union. It all started in Pennsylvania in 1857, 4 years before the Civil War. It's not actually a new thing, but ever since 1857, when we've had drilling wastewater, we've been pretty much just dumping it in our rivers and streams, untreated, at least for the total dissolved solids. That stopped because of the Marcellus Shale development. It forced Pennsylvania to actually modernize its rules and pay attention to something that we probably should have paid attention to long ago. Today in Pennsylvania, there's virtually no drilling wastewater being disposed of in our rivers and streams unless it's completely and totally treated, almost to a distilled water level. And that would not have happened but for the shale gas development. The next issue hasn't been licked. It's the nitrogen oxide emissions issue. And I've deliberately just focused in on the NOx issue amongst the whole list of air issues that we could talk about. I am concerned about the nitrogen oxide emission issue. The industry has technology available to it that would make this a non-issue. It also has technology available to it that would make this a very big issue, a very big problem. So there's a choice between the cleanest engines and the cleanest fuels and the dirtiest engines and the dirtiest fuels. And I am glad that the EPA is moving forward with regulations on air emissions from this industry. This is a fundamental issue, particularly in the Northeast, where we have had historic problems that literally sicken and kill tens of thousands of people. A lot of that pollution comes actually from old coal-fired power plants. The new gas industry cannot become part of the problem. It has to remain part of the solution. Gas migration is a real issue. It's a very complicated issue. It's absolutely the case that some people's water wells have been contaminated with pre-existing methane. It was there before gas drilling ever happened. It's also the case that in some relatively small number of cases, that poor gas drilling techniques have led to contamination of water wells with methane that were not contaminated prior to the gas drilling. There are some in the industry to this day that deny that has ever happened. There are others in the industry that recognize that it has happened, and the industry as a whole must take that seriously. Lastly, just to whip through this, gas is much cleaner than coal and oil. I don't think that's a challengeable statement, really, but it's actually become controversial, at least in the Northeast. And it's because a lot of people don't understand the impacts from the alternatives. There's also a lot of people who think that, well, we can just go to wind and solar and renewables. They really think this. And we need to educate folks that wind and renewables, hydro, all of it, corn ethanol, everything is 10% of our total energy supply. Even if there was a tremendous decade ahead and we got to 20%, that would still leave 80% of our total energy that would have to come from something. And it makes a huge difference to public health, whether or not it comes from gas, coal, or oil, a huge difference. I want it to come predominantly from gas. Last but not least, I would urge you to take a look at the EPA proposed air toxic rule. There is nothing on the public policy agenda that would increase the demand for natural gas more than enacting the proposed air toxic rule. This is a rule that would govern power plants. It would increase the demand for natural gas by roughly 1.2 trillion cubic feet. It would decrease the demand for coal by about 100 million tons a year. The coal industry has been very active in opposing the rule, and I understand why. The natural gas industry hasn't been so active in supporting the rule, and I really don't understand that. So thank you so much for inviting me. I look forward to the rest of the conversation.